Good afternoon, everyone. Either the lunch was really good or it was really bad. Which one is it? Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you. So we there are not three polls, there are four polls. So the fourth poll is what we conducted right now. Please raise your hands if you think the lunch was really, really good and you ate too much of it. Okay, only this much. Perfect. Anyway, let's dive right into it.
With about 20 years of experience, primarily into governance, risk and compliance, primarily being in a role of trying to be the bridge between business and the risk and compliance function in one way or the other, whether it's the process side of things, trying to figure out how risk and compliance fits into the overall business architecture, people side, trying to define the different governance model, operating model of how it should work, or on the technology side, trying to deploy different solutions such as the GRC platforms to make risk and compliance efficient and effective. So this is a very interesting and close topic to us, both of us, given the work we do. And this idea or concept or point of view that we have is something we want to present in front of you. Before we proceed, I also want to mention this is completely, the views expressed here are completely personal or private to what Pranay and I have come up with. Has no endorsement from the organizations we work for. So let's proceed. So risk management has been talked a lot, debated a lot, written about a lot, and we are still talking about risk management. And the reason is because I think something is still lacking when we talk about risk management and the overall process of risk management. Is the process really effective? Because for the most part, we still think that risk management is a very administrative overhead. It's a topic that has to be dealt by the risk and compliance professionals. It does not add a lot of value to the overall scheme of things, so on and so forth. So we try to break it up into three areas of concern which we want to solve. The first is about stakeholder engagement. And you have all the stakeholders in the topic of risk that you're having. And it doesn't mean the stakeholders in the room, whether those stakeholders are coming from across the organization. It's also about if all the stakeholders that you're having a discussion with come with the same context in the room. And the context is about the overall business strategy. What's the overall business strategy? What problems is the company or the organization solving? And how that is percolated down from the top to the different organization levels into the people sitting in the room where you're having this discussion. Are they all talking about the same thing? Because if you're not having the right context when you're doing this conversation, you're basically then talking about very operational, tactical things which don't add a lot of value into the overall scheme of things, especially thinking about 3-year, 5-year timeline. So that is the first thing which we would want to emphasize on the problem statement of how do we get the right stakeholder engagement, and with each stakeholder having the right and accurate understanding of the overall business goals. So we did polls through the session, so let's see what was the outcome. Each of you would have chosen one or the other option. And what has been shown here is that primarily, given probably we come from a lot of IT background, what we have seen so far, majority of the crowd feels that the risk process or the risk identification or risk management process is primarily IT driven, which is what is the problem statement here, because it should be largely a diverse stakeholder group, especially business driven, with IT having the same understanding as the business has.
Alright, so the second problem that we talked about or asked you through the poll was whether we understand the relevant business or technology problem in the real sense, right? So I understand, right? All of us have been part of different risk assessment, risk identification programs and activities. And we do think that we understand the problem really well, because that's typically what happens, right? The IT or the business gives us a problem statement saying, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. Can you please do a quick risk identification or a risk assessment and tell me what sort of risks am I looking at, how to address it, blah, blah, blah. That's what typically happens. But The reality is, if we don't understand the entire context that Anurag was trying to talk about through diverse stakeholder perspectives, our understanding of the risk relevant to it is also very limited. So, in order to understand the relevant business or technology problem, we need to be there, at the beginning of the value chain, and bring diverse perspectives, understand those perspectives, and define those problems really well. Typically, I'm sure most of you would have seen there are two key challenges that happen when we as risk professionals try to do the risk assessment or risk identification, right? The first problem is our focus is very, very operational or technical, as opposed to being strategic, right? We are very much focused on, okay, so we are implementing cloud. Let's look at the standards relevant to cloud. Let's write down the risks relevant to it and then do a quick assessment, quantification, blah, 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 right? So it's very operational, very tactical, not strategic at all. And the second key problem is the timeline. We look at present. We don't look at it from a futuristic perspective. How many of you, 5 years back, talked about AI risk? Today everyone is talking about it because everyone is talking about it, right? That's exactly the other problem. So our understanding of the problem has to be very clear, not operational but strategic, and not just in the present time frame, but also more futuristic, right? So we did ask you through the second poll, what do you think about it? And let's take a look at the results here. So we asked you, does the traditional process identify or address the real issues that matter to business, right? And I don't think you can read it, but majority of you have said sometimes, which is very, very clear. The word is not black and white, it's gray. Sometimes it does address, sometimes it doesn't. But reality is, we would want it to be always, right? That's the ideal state everyone would want to be in. By the way, hats off to the two guys who wanted to know where the food is. So good job, guys. Thanks for putting that whole response there. Being very truthful, right? There are two people. So I hope you had good lunch, by the way.
Yeah.
But yeah, let me take a very quick example on what I just said, right? Today, most of you would have seen that when business asks us about highlighting risks, we or our folks or our peers sometimes use it as a mechanism to gain management attention. How many times have you seen somebody who leads SecOps writing to the management and highlighting a risk that I don't have enough manpower? So there's a risk in SecOps related processes, and hence, things can fail. And then they get the tick or the check mark from the management to recruit more people, hire more folks, and thus increase their team, which in a way is needed, but it's a very, very operational and a present time frame view, right? It should be the other way around as to something that is more strategic, not just related to hiring people, but something broader, and something that impacts a longer time frame, at least 3 to 5 years from now. So that's the challenge, the second challenge that we typically find through the traditional risk management process.
Alright, so the last one is about having a 360-degree approach to it. So when we do a risk assessment or a risk management exercise, at what point do we feel comfortable? We figured it all out. We have so many standards, frameworks, and references to go to, but do you really feel that you've sorted it? You feel comfortable? Again, talking about a long-term view. Couple of years, not even 3 years, 2 years ago, nobody was talking about generative AI and the impact it will make, for example. The same thing happened with the blockchain when it came into the market. So how do you be futuristic ready? Most of the times, if the trap is that you pretty much get caught into what is trending, what is popular, what's happening around you, and that ends up becoming your focus for problems to solve. But how do you know what else is going on? It could be traditional, conventional topics which you may have ignored while trying to solve the shiny problems. So how do you know that you have had a holistic approach towards risk assessment? That's the third challenge here. And again, from a polling standpoint, I think the majority have said maybe. So I think being on the fence, not really saying yes or no. So I think majority of you feel the same way, that even after going through this exercise, you still have a doubt in your heart that maybe something is not yet covered, right? So having said all these three things and the problem statements, what is a potential approach towards solving this? So This has an interesting story. So Pranay and I were having a discussion once over coffee, and I was talking to Pranay about my need to do a risk workshop within my organization, and I was asking him what would be the right way or a right approach to go about doing it from his experience. And while we were chatting about it, he shared and brought in the concept of design thinking as a certified design thinking coach. And we started linking how design thinking and risk management, or either risk management can actually complement or extend the design thinking process within a particular business. We'll talk more about it in a little bit, but basically what design thinking tries to do are these three broad agendas. One is about the human factor. So at the end of the day, whether it's a technology stack, process stack, or an organization, at the end of the day, there is always a human at the end. Right? So the human needs and human desires are paramount no matter what you're doing. So we need to acknowledge, and the process acknowledges the human need within what you're trying to solve for, or what you're trying to discuss. The human needs which are external to the organization, which are your customers, your regulators, your shareholders, and the human needs which are internal to the organization, which is your board, your employees, your stakeholders within the organization, essentially leads to the objectives that the company wants to solve. Those objectives percolate down to the departmental goals, team goals, and then eventually amongst the people in the room with whom you're having a conversation. And you need to acknowledge the human needs and desires within that conversation. So that's first thing. The second thing is about focusing on the real and underlying problems and not getting caught with what is obvious and what is in front of you right there. So the design thinking approach will also has a set of toolkits and techniques. It gives you a lot of techniques for you to do a very critical thinking approach towards what are you really trying to solve and getting to that real cause that you want to pursue in future. And the third thing is about design thinking also encourages thinking without boundaries. So there are concepts like the wildcard approach where nothing is off the table, everything is considered, everything is noted, and there is a process to revisit each and every idea before you kind of make a decision or you discard something. So the wildcard approach, kind of promotes creativity, promotes innovative thinking, out-of-the-box thinking, and that helps in many of the challenges we just talked about. So we'll see now shortly, in brief, what exactly we mean by integrating risk management, not as a standalone process happening in silo, but as a logical extension to the design thinking when you're trying to solve a business problem.
Alright, so quick question to everyone. How many of you already know about design thinking? Excellent. One. Almost 10 people. Not bad. That's actually good. So all of you have at least some understanding or awareness of design thinking is my assumption here. Let's talk about design thinking for a minute, right? So design thinking is not a new concept. It has been here for multiple decades now. But there are two key inflection points which I think are very, very important. Both the inflection points were led by a gentleman called David Kelly. So David Kelly was the person who established this IDEO, which is actually a design consulting firm. He established it in somewhere around 1991. So they have their own set of tools, methodologies, standards, etc. when it comes to design thinking. So they do formal engagements, etc. And they have been the driving force behind design thinking for the last few decades. Then in 2004, David Kelly set up the D School in Stanford. So D School, it actually brought a little bit more weight behind design thinking in terms of bringing a more formal structure, education, training, etc. through the Stanford branding as well. So these are the two key inflection points where firms started knowing about and leveraging design thinking in some shape and form. But here's the thing, I have been associated with a number of firms now to do design thinking workshops. Typically today, most of the big organizations use design thinking in some shape or form, specifically for driving technology innovations. I have, at least in my experience, not seen anyone trying to leverage design thinking to integrate it with risk management per se. So again, design thinking, an old tool, very effective tool, as Anurag mentioned, addresses the problems that we just described. And I think its application to risk management would really change or turn the tide towards us. So all yarn, all theory, great, awesome, but how to do that, right? So this brings me to the final key slide here. Anurag and I, he mentioned that we were having a bit of discussion on one of his issues in terms of doing the right level of risk identification and risk management processes through an effective mechanism. And over a cup of coffee, and I assured you it was only a cup of coffee, nothing else, we came across the factor of finding design thinking could really work. So then we sat down, did a lot of brainstorming to come up with this 5R framework. Sorry, both of us are consultants. I still am, he's not, he's an ex-consultant. But we can't stay away from framework. So this is our 5R framework. Right, so what is it about? So today let's just take a glimpse at it and we'll talk about how to understand it better a bit later. So the first R of the 5R framework is reference framing. So reference framing basically is all about contextualizing what we are trying to do. So there are two key aspects of design thinking, right? One is the stakeholder group needs to be diverse, because unless you understand multiple perspectives of stakeholders, and stakeholders being the business teams, the technology team, the risk and compliance team, etc., you can't really make up a really effective solution or risk management process. So that's one part of it, and then the second part of it is risk management has to go beyond the risk management. So I'll repeat it. Risk management has to go beyond the risk management. Risk management typically comes up much later in the value chain, right? So somewhere business decides that, okay, we need to do so and so. They send a mandate to technology. We need to do so and so. Technology says, all right, let me try and do this technology. And then technology sends a mandate to the risk and compliance team saying, I'm doing so and so through this technology. Can you tell me what risks are there? So the idea is risk management teams need to come up way earlier in the situation or the cycle to understand the right context. And this is what is done through reference framing. So reference framing is building a frame of reference to get the right context. Context of what? The context of organizational priorities and challenges. We are not talking about risk management at this stage, please understand. But we are talking about involving the risk and compliance stakeholders along with the business and technology stakeholders at this stage, because everybody needs to be in sync and on the same page when it comes to risk management. Unless we as risk professionals understand the entire concept, we can't provide effective solutions. So reference training is all about understanding the organizational priorities, their challenges, what they are trying to do, the big picture, 40,000 feet view that we typically don't bother about. Right? So the second R is basically reflection. We just talked about, do we understand the real problem? Because when someone tells us, I am facing this problem, they might not themselves know what real problem they are facing. Sometimes what happens is, the problem statement that is given to us is actually a causation of an underlying issue. So focusing on the underlying issue will really solve the actual problem for us. So the entire context or entire idea of this second phase, reflection, is to look at the problem statement through multiple dimensions or in multiple dimensions and kind of validate whether this is really a problem or is it a different problem that we need to solve. Right? Don't worry, I'll give you examples a little bit later as well. So the second stage is all about understanding the problem. While the first stage, reference framing, is ideally led by business, the second problem, understanding the problem, will have more participation from business and technology both, and risk will also provide their perspective. Again, second stage is also not about risk per se. So then we come to the third stage, which is resolution. So this is where we would have understood the 40,000 feet view, we would already have understood what the real problem is, and then we talk about solutions. The solution can be process related, technology related, people related, anything. Again, this is not about, this is not really directly related to risk management, but risk teams are there, have to be there, use certain methodologies to get clarity on what sort of solutions are being prioritized and why. So these first three stages that we talked about, understanding the context, understanding the problem, and understanding the solution, they are very essential for risk and compliance teams to build their perspective around what comes next. And what comes next is really rethinking risk. That's what the stage we have called. But ideally, this is where the risk and compliance teams they take a lead there, right? So this is where the risk identification, risk assessment, risk management, all of that happens. Now, when we reach stage 4, rethinking risk, I, as a risk and compliance professional, will take a lead and drive the business and technology teams to, come to terms with respect to the challenges that they have faced, what it means in terms of risks, the impact multiple risks might have on the solutions that they have talked about so far. So this is really a stage where risk management really shines, right? The risk and compliance teams take the lead, they drive everything, and we are not going to use any traditional risk identification methodologies. In traditional way, what we do is typically, okay, here's a checklist. This is based on NIST, so I will just try to fill it up based on my understanding. So we are not going to do it that way, and I'll talk about what we are going to do. But finally, in refining stage, this is where everybody comes together, the business, the technology, the risk and compliance teams. By now, we have clear understanding of priorities, challenges, problem statement, solutions, risks, everything. So everyone comes together and understands in context of being on the same platform or on the same page, how things are going to turn out and why they are going to turn out the way they are going to turn out. So everything that was disjointed so far all converges and comes together. Right? So that's basically the 5R framework. And let me give you a very quick example because this theory might not, this 5-minute session might not really do justice to the theory part of it. So let's look at a quick example. Before leveraging this 5R framework or using what we do today, let's say there's a life sciences and pharma company which basically wants to go for building advanced data science capabilities, right? So when they talk about building advanced data science capabilities, in the current state they typically go to technology and say, listen, I want advanced data science capabilities, can you do something for me? Technology says, fine, I will implement cloud and AI for data science. Right? That's what happens. And then they go to risk management and say, can you please do a risk identification and assessment on cloud and AI for data science? As simple as that, right? So risk management sitting here doesn't know why they are asking you to do risk identification and assessment of AI and cloud. They simply pick up their checklist, fill in the risks, do a little bit of this and that, and then send it back to technology. Technology adds their value because everyone has to add value to earn their salaries, right? So then they send it back to the business, and that's how typical traditional risk management process works. Everybody is disjointed, nobody knows the end-to-end picture. But if you look at the 5R framework, if you do it this way, what happens is everybody will get in the room together in the reference framing stage. Business, technology, and risk and compliance teams. They will try and understand why it is happening. So probably the outcome of the first stage will be that since I am a life sciences and pharma company focused on R&D, I have tons of data, a humongous amount of data. I can actually use it to gain market share. So that becomes my actual context or 40,000 feet view, which now everybody understands. They want to gain market share through leveraging the data, etc. Then they get into the second stage, which is about reflection. So basically, reflection says that we need to understand the problem, right? So now technology comes into play and says, okay, to become a leading data science organization, to gain market share, we probably need to implement XYZ number of technologies, but they finally prioritize something. And for sake of simplicity, let's say they prioritize cloud and AI for data science. Now again, everybody understands why cloud and AI is there, because we are talking about data science, right? And then the third stage, which is more about resolution, sorry, my bad. I think the second stage is more about talking about data science as a problem. Having data science capabilities as a problem. The third stage is where the cloud and AI will come into picture because that's about putting together the solution there, right? Now, by the end of third stage, everyone understands the context is gaining market share through data. The problem is having advanced data science capabilities. The solution is having cloud and AI for data. Now everyone understands that. So when risk management comes into picture on rethinking risk, they are many pictures in the beginning in 5R, right? But when they take the lead in the fourth stage, rethinking risk, they have the entire context now. So they will look at risks in two different manners, right? One is the obvious risks, which they have been doing through checklists, NIST standard, CSA standard, blah, blah, blah. That anyway is their obvious risks. But they will also look at it from the second context, which is the contextual risk or the hidden risk. So we are talking about a life sciences R&D company having a lot of data, using data science, so and leveraging AI. So probably we also need to look at some unconventional things such as AI ethics, right? So AI ethics is something that is very contextual and hidden in this particular scenario. What happens to patient data? What happens to the research data, etc., etc. I think somebody earlier today said human is the weakest link in the chain, right? So human factor. How do we ensure that we train our whatever the employees, third parties, etc., etc., in such a way that once we have the data science capabilities to cloud and AI, we don't have the breaches or we reduce the risk, whatever, to the minimum or to an acceptable level. So that's the difference, right? In this stage, now we are, in addition to talking about obvious risks, we are also talking about the hidden or the contextual risks. And that's where this will bring value, right? And then finally, refining, you are not, writing it down and sending it over back to somebody. So you are all again sitting down, risk and compliance is sitting down with business and technology and sharing their understanding of risk and bringing everybody onto the same page. They will be challenged by business and technology. They will address those challenges. They will get real-time feedback, etc. But at the end of the day, this fifth stage will help them validate the entire thing. So from top to bottom, from stage 1 to stage 5, everybody in the organization knows what they are talking about, why they are talking about it, and what are they going to do about it. Everybody on the same page. So that's the power of the 5R framework. And I think
I would like to add one more R.
Can you add it in? I'm on the floor. Let me just thanks. So anyway, maybe you can go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I can talk
It's
later.
okay, my floor is
I too had a question.
Let us first. Let us first.
So you have more refined or optimized approach.
Really do in reality is the mismanagement. I would like to add one more R. So what happens is with the reality, risk manager deals with BU heads, business heads, technological heads, and all the manager level. I want to add one more R, that is real people.
Real people.
Real people. So what do they have the perception at the manager level is different from the real people who works on the data at the entry level. I always have an extra sessions or extra workshops I practically do with the real people where you could see amazing results because the reality is always not 100% to the management.
And that's a great point. Thank you for adding it. Context in the reference framing, because when I say business, technology, and risk and compliance teams come together, it is not only the leadership that comes together, right? So we have to very carefully identify the people, their roles, and then define teams based on those. So, but still, point taken, it's a very valid point and a very important one. Thank you for interrupting me. It was very worth it. So you had something to add?
Very relevant to that what she asked.
Just have the mic so that
Everyone
everyone
will
can
be able to hear.
hear.
Like when you mentioned understand what people really need, how do you set the baseline there, and then who are the participants and how do you consolidate on what they want?
Excellent question.
Because she mentioned about real people at some stage, and then the other question was, what is the most time-consuming phase that you go through, and which is the most important that leads you to the resolution? Obviously, you are talking about resolution as the third step. So I was very concerned about what do you baseline there at the reflection, and who are the participants, and how do you consolidate on them? Thank you.
Perfect question. So this is a 5R framework, and I'm going to the last slide where I'll answer this question. At least try to answer. So the whole idea of this 5R framework, which we discussed today, it was just a basic glimpse of it, right? So under each of these stages, let me go back here. Under each of these stages, to your point, there are a lot of methods and techniques that you can leverage for each stage. For example, in reference framing, just to give a very basic example, you can use the technique to conduct interviews to understand the context. Or you can identify people by their roles, call them in a workshop and have a much more open discussion. Or you can send them a set of questions upfront and get your answers there. So there are 3 techniques just like that, right? In this particular phase reflection, there is a technique called abstraction laddering. It basically helps us understand, go to the whys and hows of it to understand the real problem. So we start with a problem statement and we go up to ask why, or we go down to ask how, and that's how we arrive at the real problem. Sometimes the real problem is different, sometimes it's the same problem that is out there. But for each of these stages, there are a multitude of techniques, methodologies, or ways of working which can help us identify the right set of stakeholders for each stage, how to conduct those sessions or actions, and how to get the desired outcome that we are expecting. Right? So, long story short, we plan to conduct a much more detailed 90-minute to a 2-hour session, which will actually be a deep dive into the 5R framework of the design thinking for risk methodology. You will see a communication from IST to Hyderabad chapter on that. Sometimes
Just a teaser.
yeah, this is just a teaser. But in that session, what we are going to cover is we are going to cover 3 things. One is a detailed view into each of those R stages, what those are, real examples, etc. What techniques and methodologies can we use for it. The second is basically, I think I already said it, the methods and techniques for each. There are multiple, and you really will be surprised how many ways are there to achieve the outcome of each stage. And then finally, we will all together delve into some real-world examples of what we have experienced, what you experienced, in course of our work, daily life, etc. For each stage, as well as an end-to-end view of how this 5R will really work and be effective. That's basically it. I think our idea was to present this as a teaser to you. If you guys are interested, I hope you are. Please do look out for that communication.
Thank you for listening to us.
Thank you for not sleeping.
There